days, we are simply beginning to see races that are simply too close to call. Anyone from the top 3 teams could be odds on to win the race, but Red Bull, I think they might find this race a bit of a toughie. And that's not just my word. Going into the Canadian Grand Prix, Red Bull aren't looking quite as strong as they were, say, back at the Chinese Grand Prix just a couple of months ago. Back then, we were all expecting a repeat of the 2023 season, where Carlos Sainz would be the sole winner not dressed in blue. That's proved not to be the case, and it's official. The RB20 is technically worse than the RB19. The Canadian Grand Prix, sure, it's got those really long straights, but it's also a hybrid street circuit at heart, with effectively 3 very tight chicanes where curbs are at the forefront and a very tricky hairpin. And we do need to wait for a full-on race circuit to see the truth of the team's situation. But there is doubt coming from the team themselves, most notably from the big 3. The consensus from Verstappen, Marko and Horner is that there is a clear fundamental issue that the team needs to get itself around, and it's really taken a very long time to get anywhere near a solution. The car is unable to fully attack the curves, which are critical at street circuits and old-school F1 circuits like Imola, where the road isn't 500 feet wide and merely hitting the apex of the corner would be enough to get good speed and curb contact is at a minimum. Now typically you'd be able to fix this with a simple upgrade, and within a few races or so you'd be back on your feet and it would be a complete and utter distant memory. Much like Carlos Sainz's victory at Melbourne is now a distant memory. Both Verstappen and Dr. Marko, and now even Christian Horner, are starting to admit that this problem is going to take a while to fix for many different reasons. This issue has been around since the RB18, but other facets of the car have masked this flaw. But now, by Horner's own admission, the likes of Ferrari and McLaren are right on top of them. Convergence has arrived much sooner than he or anyone at Red Bull expected. And also, based on what Dr. Marko has been saying, the simulations that they have been running back in the computer systems back at Milton Keynes has suggested that the car, the RB20, could ride the curbs just fine. But that's proven not to be the case when they actually get to the track. How are you supposed to develop a viable setup if what you're getting is not actually true? And considering that Verstappen is a guy who likes a pointy front end to attack corners with precision, Montreal being a track with very tricky chicanes and a very important hairpin and a wall of champions which could catch Max out if he drives angrily, and not to mention there is rain being forecast, albeit not a monsoon like we got in 2011. As a result, I think Max Verstappen will be increasingly limited, especially if he can't do the business and get pole in qualifying. And not to mention, Montreal has been historically bumpy. However, they have resurfaced it recently, which might yield some benefits to the Red Bull car, but then again, it does offer up some unknowns, because as we know from Austin, it constantly gets bumps because it's built on a marshland. You might get some bumps anyway, because that track is in theory open for public use, and who knows what that could cause in terms of troubles and brand new bumps after it's been resurfaced. And what makes this particularly interesting is that everyone at the top 3, including Mercedes with a very small extent, are getting closer than ever. You have to get to granular levels in terms of performance updates. And according to an article from Alpenmotor and Sport, it's down to a really important part of the Red Bull dominance train that other teams have managed to take up and Ferrari have enhanced upon. This means that you can have lower ride heights at the rear and thusly more suck, thanks to the use of more compliant torsion bars. Not only has this proven quite fruitful for Ferrari and Mercedes to a similar extent, it's also meant that Ferrari has given these parts to Haas. And that means that they can get some good data and they can benefit, and they've been benefiting from this development since the Miami Grand Prix, and they've steadily been improving. And Horner has openly said that he might use a similar tactic this year as well, to use Racing Bulls to try and figure out what's been going on with the front end of the car and try and solve the issue, like they were able to do with AlphaTauri and get them back in the fight for 7th place in the Constructors when they spent the longest time last year right at the back. Do you know what the most surprising thing about this is, and what makes McLaren look really good? Is that they've not adopted this suspension strategy. Either it's because they have not yet adopted it, or they've taken a look at it and has deemed it not worth it. And what does that mean? But hang on a minute, if they include this solution, aren't they going to run into the same problems as Red Bull? Well, perhaps, but let's remember here, the rear suspension is but one mere component of the entire car package. And F1 Big Data's race simulation, based on previous results this year, point to a 3-race split in terms of race pace to within 1/10 of a second per lap. Oh, goody! Now, it may seem like it's all action up front, but there is also some stuff going on at Racing Bulls, not to mention that little cheeky announcement on Instagram that Red Bull made the other day to say, stay tuned. But Racing Bulls has now really proven to me that for 2025, in terms of the Red Bull lineup, it's going to be nothing. Nothing's going to change. Checo is expected to get a 1-year extension, and Tsunoda and Ricciardo will be retained by the second team for another year, with the team CEO and team principal happy with his driver's results and synergy with the operation. And supposedly, Horner's been protecting Daniel Ricciardo from any incursion from the likes of Liam Lawson, because all the TV directors have been jumping on this drama. Whenever Daniel makes a mistake, they always cut to Liam. And it also disregards Tsunoda's efforts, with the Japanese driver looking increasingly unlikely to get a spot at the top table next to Max, with the BBC's Andrew Benson reckoning that it's down to the likes of the top brass at Red Bull Racing, except Helmut Marko, not rating Tsunoda highly enough. And this is right off the back of Yuki having his best season so far. It's absolutely bonkers why Christian Horner is sleeping on this guy. But then that article from Benson goes on to say something that really resonated with me and makes a lot of sense, because it's an argument I've been making as to why Checo was being kept, but now it applies to Yuki. Because Yuki, he ain't got no sponsors. Because even though Max Verstappen is a really successful driver and he brings in a lot of money to the team and brings in loads of major blue chip sponsors, he himself costs a pretty penny. He is the most expensive driver on the grid by a long shot. Round about $75 million in base salary. Yes, I know, driver salaries are not included in the cost cap, but it is something that Red Bull has to pay for. You need some extra cash to fund that, and Checo does just that. He has plenty of sponsors, he also gets people to buy Red Bull cans, and he also has a huge Mexican and North American fan base, as we see at Austin, Vegas, Miami, and of course in Mexico City itself. And I think that might just be enough to keep Checo in for at least one more year before things change. And also, Checo is obviously waiting to see what happens in 2026. Does Max take a year out because he doesn't like the regulations? Or does he go to Mercedes? Because all the rumours are saying, including Alex Albon staying at Williams, that Mercedes might have the advantage when it comes to the powertrain, and that could be important in this new regulation cycle. So if Checo stays there, he can easily become the team leader if Max leaves, and therefore he's guaranteed himself another seat for a couple of years. And all of this is at Yuki's expense, him falling into the ghastly slot of the organisation, in that he's good enough where he is, and the team need him as a constant, and he's doing a good enough job, so why change things? And also, you got to consider that Tsunoda and Ricciardo are popular. Ricciardo, well, he's just Daniel Ricciardo. Everyone likes him in a way because, smiley, geek, memes and all that. And of course, Yuki Tsunoda is an increasingly popular person amongst the teenage Formula 1 fans, and they're going to become adults with a lot more spending power. You've got a driver that people like, and not to mention they bring in a lot of cash, a lot of support for a team that has a soulless name and a corporate entity. You need as much good press as you can get, and these two do bring it, especially since Yuki has gotten over his temper. And like I said, they need to keep Checo to make sure that Red Bull has a decent bottom line, especially if we start to see the 2023 season repeat almost in its entirety. We saw the Miami slump, and then he sort of corrected himself a little bit, and now in Monaco he has another big crash, albeit it wasn't his fault, but he was right at the back, let's be fair there, because of timing and Red Bulls and all that stuff. I really hope it doesn't continue to be just a repeat of 2023, because Checo cannot afford to do that. And if Horner does keep him around, even though he does fall off and they lose the constructors because of him, then what is this going to be saying about Christian Horner's operation? Even though I do want Checo to stay there, it is a bit of a safe bet, and that's not Red Bull. That's not the character type that they've really chosen to portray themselves as over the course of their time in F1. And of course, Daniel Ricciardo might get back up to the top team, but that is not looking likely right now based on his performance. As far as I think, Christian Horner can do just about enough to keep him in F1 with the second team, providing his valuable experience and really good relationship with the team itself. Peter Baer, he sees dollar signs, Horner sees dollar signs to help pay Max Verstappen's driver bill, so I think he's wanted to keep it as it is because Max Verstappen brings in the results, he brings the team title, and this is probably an indicator to Liam Lawson that really you should stop trying to get into Red Bull, mate. You're not going to get there. That promise that they made last year, Dr. Marko, yeah, that's been broken. You should really look for another team. And I bet he will. In any case, we've got to get back to the Canadian Grand Prix and news about that, and so to tie in Racing Bulls to this notion, so the team will probably score more points and do well in qualifying, and give Aston Martin more and more sleepless nights. And in regards to other teams, we could expect a strong showing from Mercedes, relatively speaking, with both drivers now having the front wing that was brought for Monaco to some moderate success, and it did bring George Russell to within 1,000th of a second of Lando Norris in Q3. It could provide them some really good data, and also some valuable improvements in breaking them away from the rest of the grid and bringing them that just a little bit closer to the top three. I think we can safely say that Mercedes is the fourth fastest team, and they are steadily improving. They are getting a better handle on the W15, like I suspected, with George Russell reckoning that there could be a fresh start for the team once Lewis has left. Now, before you type in the comments that old Mercedes hates Lewis now, here's some valuable context for that comment. What Russell said was reflecting the change of mood and sparking inspiration that Hamilton will be feeling with his upcoming move to Ferrari. Basically, that a change is as good as a rest. Russell does point out that Lewis is still a valuable member of the team, and had he left in 2021 like he probably originally intended, get that next title, and then he would retire off into the sunset and do what he wants, having become the most winningest driver in the entire Formula 1 history without question. That would have also meant that Mercedes would have slumped even harder in 2022, with that massive title constructors fight, and not having Lewis Hamilton's input towards the end of the season and into 2023. George Russell would have been on his own, Valtteri Bottas wouldn't have been there because his deal to Alfa Romeo was sorted out earlier on in the year. Who would have been there to partner up with George Russell? What, Esteban Ocon? No, never mind. In any case, the mood at Mercedes is improving, and that's simply down to the team starting to accept Lewis's departure and, let's be honest, starting to filter out the dissonance between Russell and Hamilton's comments in favour of the former, given that he's sticking around and the latter isn't. I have seen so many times this year where I would have never seen before now Toto calling out Lewis for things that he said which aren't true. And Russell, even though you may not like him, is speaking from the team's party line. Hopefully, if the results do pick up, we'll see less of that, and we'll see a really good high end to Lewis's time at Mercedes. But right now, it's something that I think the team is keen to stomp out. They know they're going to lose a lot of fans for next year because Lewis isn't there. They know that they're probably going to be getting a lot of hate because they're thinking of favoritism in favour of George. But I think they are starting to just ignore that, put on the blinkers, going, no, we don't care about this anymore. We need to think of our long-term future. George is part of it. Lewis isn't. We got to move on. And even though they're going to be flamed constantly on social media, I don't think they care anymore. I don't think Toto cares that much anymore. He just wants to get the team winning again. And how Lewis handles this change is up to him, but Mercedes do look slightly more stable than they were just a couple of months ago. But that doesn't mean Lewis won't be putting in some great results in the meantime, and I reckon that Montreal, where he got his first win, might produce a solid attack for a top 5 finish for him to get his season back on track somewhat. Sure, he's not going to be fighting for victory, Mercedes isn't quite there yet. Will they get there this year? No, but next year though, they might do. But I think it might produce one of Lewis Hamilton's most convincing performances this year so far. As for the rest of the grid, like I touched upon just now, Racing Bulls looks odds-on favourite to be scoring the remainder of points, because Aston Martin so far, their upgrades, like it did in Canada last year appropriately, are not working properly. They are now focusing on trying to get their head around what's been going on and the lack of correlation despite all of the investment for that team. Papa Stroll is looking very, very frustrated right now, I bet. Haas, Alpine, Williams are back in the mix. We don't know for sure who is going to be the next contender to Racing Bulls, who is going to be pulling a stunt and might be getting a cheeky Q3 position. And right now, it's certainly not going to be Sauber, oh no. Now it's most likely going to be Williams. Now, this was something I was going to be touching upon in my video that I recorded yesterday, but then the Ocon news dropped and I had to put that in the back burner, so I'll be making that video for tomorrow. So do subscribe to make sure that you are the first to know when I drop that video. With those first points at Monaco, it did provide the team some hope. Albon getting into Q3, and now we're heading to the track where Albon got Williams' best result and most convincing result in a long, long time. Yes, it's P7, but for them that's absolute gold. And of course I know they got second place in 2021 at Spa, but can you really count that? Well, I mean it does for George, because it was technically his first bit of F1 silverware. But all of this convergence, and Haas seemingly profiting from Ferrari's upgrades too, and another one coming in Silverstone, will be getting Zak Brown really incredibly furious that two of his rival teams have secondary operations to give them some valuable intel and backup, whereas McLaren don't have that. And do you really expect Mercedes to help them out? No! McLaren are just customers. They are not partners in the technical sense. They are with Williams though, Mercedes, and if they do get Williams themselves back up on track, then expect them to be helping out Mercedes considerably. But I'll briefly touch upon Alpine because I did interrupt that Williams video for the Esteban Ocon news, and that turned out to be my most successful video I have ever made in my nearly 20 years on this YouTube platform. How does Esteban Ocon handle himself at the Canadian Grand Prix, where many people thought he was going to be benched? He's not going to be benched. If he's able to keep a lid on it from now until the rest of the season, he might have a chance in salvaging his F1 career. But does he really expect to be going to Mercedes next year? He does think he has a chance. No. Not them, not Williams. No, I think Haas is probably his best bet, but even then I'm a bit doubtful. I mean, Yeah, the phone right there, I think he agrees with me. But we really need to go back to Williams because their upgrades that they're bringing to the Montreal track are going to be quite compelling. They're a little bit of a dark horse now because they are not as far behind Racing Bulls as you might suspect. Yes, they are of course maybe the 8th fastest team, but that could easily improve since that midfield gaggle is still quite close over the course of an entire season. And James Vowles has been open and candid about what problems the car is suffering with, including that gargantuan weight issue where they're losing nearly half a second a lap. Whether or not that's true, and it's just based on estimations from 10 kilos equals 3/10 or so, that remains to be seen. But they are bringing upgrades here which are keen to address that. Whether or not they're going to be parts of both cars, we don't know yet. But Albon will certainly be benefiting because, he did so well last year. And if they can easily drop 3, 4, 5 tenths of a second, that'll be huge. That could easily catapult them right up towards Haas and Racing Bulls in the fight for 6th place in the Constructors, and easily pin more people towards going to Williams if they can't get to Mercedes, because, like I said, in 2026, it's going to be very interesting if the Mercedes powertrain turns out to be the best, and Williams are going to be having second dibs on that. Pay attention to that. And as we saw with Alpine this year, if a team can lighten its car, it can make a difference without needing a performance tweak with a brand new part that may or may not work. If you cut weight, it's definitely going to work. So James Vowles sees that as the most logical solution in the short term to improve Williams' fortunes. And also, Montreal is a very, very momentum-strong track. If you can get a good inertial acceleration out of corners, it can easily help you, as well as trying to make a car that's extremely agile. I could expect Albon getting into Q3 again at this track. But anyway, let's get on to the main predictions. Now, I've not really talked much about Lando Norris, but I think he could be in with a shout of winning the Canadian Grand Prix. Wait, what? You barely talked about McLaren. Why are you putting Lando in first? Well, I do think he might have a chance because in Miami, we didn't see that coming. McLaren not only get into the top 10 and scoring points for once, they went on to win the thing. And Lando, he's now got that stigma of having no wins attached to him off of his back. He is now a transformed driver. And even though he did get curtailed somewhat at Monaco, he had the same problem that many other drivers were facing. They were being compromised in terms of going really, really slowly for the sake of Ferrari giving Leclerc that first win at Monaco and him being able to hold the lead from a really interesting Piastri. Had those McLarens been let loose and Piastri not sustaining that damage at the Turn 1 incident on the first start, I reckon that we could have seen a McLaren 1-2 at Monaco, with Ferrari not being that far behind. So I would like to see at a place where you can overtake and you can get some wiggle room and tire strategies might be important here, that could see us with a McLaren opportunity for getting a win. And that is kind of exciting. I know I'm a McLaren fan, but I like seeing a little bit of a challenge because I think it's going to be a close one. With second place, Charles Leclerc. Like with Lando in Miami, Charles has now got that big weight off of his shoulders and it's going to mean the world to him. He can now focus on getting some more wins knowing that he's managed to win at home. We now see two drivers who are close rivals to Max with a brand new lease of life. It could easily change what we could expect in the coming season. Expect more challenges from Ferrari and McLaren potentially for a win. That's the first time that we've seen that, them battling for victory at a Grand Prix since the late 2000s. So people who are brand new to Formula One, you are getting a snifter of we older fans and what we saw throughout the 80s, 90s, 2000s, you name it. And also, we want to see at a slightly bigger track what this Ferrari car can do. Imola, Monaco, they are somewhat curtailed in terms of their width and in terms of actually being able to overtake. Canada can be better, so it's very intriguing to see what they can do here. And that means I'm going to be putting Max Verstappen in third place. Third? Seriously? Well, yeah. Red Bull's own tones are not looking that good, and of course you can easily call it sandbagging, and we might easily see Max Verstappen going on to win the Canadian Grand Prix or something. But this is something that they've still yet to fix this problem. It's going to take a while for them to sort out, and we really need to wait until the Spanish Grand Prix to see if we've got a sustained title battle going forward, and if Max can't get pole, he cannot dictate the race and try and keep everybody behind him, because he will fight people if they are going towards his first place position. If he gets stuck behind, say, maybe Piastri, he might be able to overtake Oscar, but I don't think he's going to get anywhere past Leclerc and Norris when they're on their day. And speaking of Oscar, I could see him in fourth place because he has shown himself over the last few races to be really a strong contender for Lando. He has been out-qualifying the guy in the last few races, and even though Lando has plenty more experience and he's now been let loose to really show himself as Lando Prime, Oscar's not that far behind in a car which is steadily improving and its main weaknesses are gone, supposedly. and this could mean that Oscar could easily be in with a shout of a top 5 position. Sure, his tyre race pace management is not quite there yet. As we saw in Monaco, he fell back from Leclerc to the clutches of Sainz, most likely to preserve what rubber he had, and also Montreal is not that rough on its tyres because they're using the softest compounds again. And now they're talking about a C6 compound for Monaco, that's just basically the Hypersoft again. But I do think that Oscar stands a good chance of getting P4. I don't think he's in with a shout for a podium unless he qualifies it on pole. That would be interesting if he does that, and I would love to see that. Now, 5th place. Oh, this was tight. I think Lewis Hamilton might be in with a shout for 5th place, but I'm going to have to give that plum to Carlos Sainz because, put simply, that Ferrari car is still up there with the top 3, whereas the Mercedes isn't. No good form that Lewis Hamilton can produce yet can get in that top 5 unless one of the top 3 cars has some kind of mechanical issue. Then we might see Lewis in the top 5. But until that happens, and reliability is so good, it's going to be very unlikely, we are going to see Carlos Sainz in 5th place, because that car is evading him. It's not as good and solid as it was before. Yeah, he did get that 3rd place in Monaco, but like we saw, if you can do well in qualifying, and so long as you don't break down, then you're absolutely fine, because we didn't even see any pit stops. We had like 7 pit stops and 4 overtakes? That's ridiculous. Things might improve, but I think that Carlos is starting to realise that he is going to have to hustle that car and hustle his team to get anywhere near the top 3, because Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, they are going to be driving all out. Piastri and Sainz will probably be scrapping for the next rung in terms of driver hire. Piastri and Sainz will probably be duking each other out for the next tier of F1 drivers right now. And this means we're probably going to be seeing a trend. Piastri and Sainz fighting for position. And as we've seen, it can get quite fiery. And I think Piastri might be able to hold off Sainz enough if he can stay ahead of Carlos, because I don't think Carlos will want to get into a situation that he got into Miami with again. But one thing is for sure, it's looking very, very bright for us F1 fans because there's a little bit of jeopardy when it comes to predicting who's going to win. And things are looking bright for this channel as well, as I've got some exciting rewards and news to share with you regarding the ladder and more. You can find out more about that in this video here that you can go and watch right now, because I'm excited about where this is going, and I think you will be too. Don't miss it.